Hey, how you doing? This is Dino, and welcome to class. This week we're focusing on what is the medium, is the message. What does that saying mean, and the impact or intersection of this saying with infographics. Before we begin the quick lecture in total, let me have you do a little thought activity, and after I give you the activity, you might want to pause the video so you can do it. The activity is on the reading, the medium is the message. What are your own thoughts on this reading? Think to yourself, maybe write down some notes. And then, based on that, based on the title, based on the content of it, what do you think is the meaning of the medium is the message? Right now might be a good time to pause. All right, for those of you who came back from a pause, the person who came up with the saying the medium is the message is a gentleman named Marshall McLuhan. I'll give you a little bit of background on him so you know who he is. He was a philosopher slash media guru back from the 1960s. And we'll get into some reasons later on why we're going back that far back into the Wayback Machine in terms of something as seemingly more current like infographics. He was a major pioneer of media theory, one of the very first to do it. And one of his claims to fame is that he helped predict the idea of the web close to 30 years before its invention. Again, he was really known as being sort of a really seminal thinker in a lot of media theory circles. A fun fact is that he was the patron saint of Wired magazine. When it first came out, they thought of him as being a guiding light for the theme of and direction of the magazine. And two things. The second one, more important today, he came up with a couple of notable terms. The idea of the global village and that we're all kind of interconnected to one another, and the medium is the message, which will be the focus of what we'll be talking about in the next little while. Again, today for this lecture, it's mini lecture, we'll be talking and focusing on the medium as the message. I'm going to give you a couple of quick quotes from that reading. I'll sort of say them quickly and let you sort of digest them as I say them. These are more of the key ones from it. First, the personal and social consequences of any medium result from the new scale that is introduced into our affairs by each extension of ourselves or technology. Again, the idea that a medium helps to increase our scale and extend ourselves using this technology. The second quote is that we are considering the psychic and social consequences of the designs or patterns as they amplify or accelerate existing processes. Again, you notice that medium in a vacuum, they actually impact ourselves, and this way, McLuhan's believing that they have, in fact, psychic and social consequences of new media. And thirdly, for the message of any media or technology is the change of scale or pace or pattern that it introduces into human affairs. In short, the medium or the technology that's introduced doesn't just sit there and do nothing. It actually changes things, like the scale of what we do, how big it gets, the pace. Usually technology gets faster, and the pattern in terms of how we organize ourselves and our world around us. Going to have you do a little activity. You may want to pause after this. Before I list them, or some personal thoughts on them, what do you think are the traits of infographics based on the quote that I just gave you, which is, again, it's here sort of scaled into three different parts. Quote 1 up here, quote 2 here, quote 3 here. And if you have them, if you have access to a Google Drive for this, if you're part of this class, you should have access to a folder called Exercises. Within that, you'll have a Google Doc called Medium is the Message. And if you're having problems thinking about that, I would really highly suggest just think about it and pause the video. If you don't have any idea about any of this, think about this. We've been talking about infographics in this class. What are some of the problems in terms of, what do you think about the differences that infographics has as a medium, and compare that to television, radio, or newspapers? That might be the easiest way for you to prompt some thoughts on what are the actual traits of infographics as a medium. Again, you might want to pause this and write down some notes, type them into a Google Doc or wherever you do your writing. Great. For those of you who took a pause, I'll give you my own traits of infographics as a medium. If you've been struggling, have none on your own, I'm sure you have at least a handful. Here are some ones that you might want to consider. First, when you have an infographic, it's usually on a two-dimensional medium. When you see that medium, you don't know where to actually enter that thing into that infographic. There's no specific entry point. There are multiple viewing entry points, so there's no single one. As a result of this, the viewer needs to help to understand. I would contrast this with television, where you normally look at the television, your face is right looking towards the middle of it, and then the content just sort of presents itself towards you, as opposed to a infographic where it's a piece of visual on a piece of paper or a screen. You don't know where, when you're beginning, where to start. You can start at the top, at the bottom, at the left, at the right, the upper corner, the lower corner, etc. A second trait is that all information is presented at one time. In short, it conflates time and space. When you get an infographic, if it's not a dynamic one that's static, that's just sitting there on a piece of paper or on a screen, you usually see all of it at one time. This is contrasted for things like television or maybe even radio or film, where you watch the screen, and then over time the story unfolds. Like say if it's a 2-hour movie, you don't see it all right when you look at the beginning of the TV show or the film. It evolves over time. So it's like the phenomenon that you're looking at, the visual phenomenon, this medium evolves over time for television, radio, or film, as opposed to an infographic. Third, infographics shorten communication. They shorten communication. Because of them, because you're putting a premium on visuals and text, you're focusing on really, hopefully, compelling images, and the text you're using is shorter as opposed to if you're looking at a book, which obviously would have more text, or a newspaper, or a magazine. Some other traits of infographics as a medium. As you might imagine, it prioritizes the visual over the textual. The graphical elements are more important. It's not an infographic, and the name graphic isn't involved in it for no reason. There is a reason it's visual medium. It's visual as a medium, as opposed to, again, like a newspaper or like a print magazine. Something else you might want to think about in terms of a trait of infographics as a medium is that it uses abstraction, visualizations, to communicate other abstractions. For example, you use symbols, indexes, and icons to communicate. So in short, the content from this, the content for this abstraction, can be, a metaphor or something very abstract. And then when we write, we use written language, text, typing, and then these specific words help communicate the abstraction that's the underlying phenomenon, as opposed to an infographic where it uses something abstract, like an icon, where something looks like something else, or directs you towards something else, to communicate the underlying message. Another trait is that it overestimates the information conveyed. When you see an infographic, many viewers unfortunately think that infographics cover the entire topic under investigation. That can be really problematic, especially if it's a very complex phenomenon. You don't want to have people think it's really simple. You want to think it's as complex as it is. An infographic usually makes it simpler, and it doesn't really represent the totality of the complexity of the underlying phenomena. Other traits, these are probably a little bit less important. You require tools to make the infographic. If it's online, you use a piece of software, hardware, probably an iPad, a desktop computer, a laptop. If you're making it offline, you're going to need a pen or a colored pencil to create the actual infographic itself. So you need these tools. You're also going to need some kind of visual medium to help share the content of the infographic. For example, if it's an online infographic, you're going to need to use the screen. If it's printed, you're going to need some kind of like glossy paper, maybe regular paper to show it. Also, infographics have, because of what we were talking about before, there are multiple entry points. Infographics also have multiple ways and directions of communication flow. You can create like a flow chart, and the visual can go from top to bottom, left to right, bottom to top. Information can flow in multiple different directions. Again, versus maybe television where you're looking at the screen and the content just flows in front of you. Also, for a trait of infographics as a medium, it's immediate and asynchronous. All information is presented at one time, so you get it all at once. It's all immediate. And then also because it can be like on a web page, or a piece of paper that you store somewhere, it is divorced from the time that it's created, so it's asynchronous. Some other traits, similar to what was said just before, infographics transcend space and time because all the information is presented at once. It fosters visual communication. It has more textual information and less oral communication. It's purely visual. As it was said before, and again, that's sort of a slightly different take, it shortens communication. Again, it's images. It's focused on images and small pieces of text versus, of course, like a thing like a book where there's a lot and pages and pages and pages after of text. And then finally, it decontextualizes communication. You're going to have that website by itself. You're going to have your printed infographic by itself. Because it's not ushered in with more contextual explanation, you can have greater misunderstanding of the content of the infographic. As a result, the response could be greater emotional than you like, or it could be less rational. Why is it important to know infographics as a medium? When you know a medium, and you know its weaknesses and strengths, as these things were listed just now, it helps you communicate more effectively. If a medium has a particular weakness and you know of it, you can try to address it in multiple ways. If it has particular strengths, you want to exaggerate and amplify those things. Finally, if you haven't done so, in terms of an activity, you want to finish writing traits of infographics based on this quote. Perhaps you have your own that the different than the ones I just spoke about. Again, if you have access to the drive, it will be the place where you can write the traits. You can write it at home on a piece of paper, with a computer, anywhere. If you do have access to a Google Drive, go to the folders called exercises, and then go to the Google Doc called exercise medium is the message. So again, the folder is exercises, doc is called this. The quotes that can help to motivate your different thoughts about the traits of infographics are up here. And again, if you're having any problems, I would try to think about how infographics are different than television, radio, newspapers, film, etc. With all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this short mini lesson.